two speakers. We have Klāvs, who is from Protest, from Latvia, and we have Katja, who is member of Sitting Executive Committee, and she's from Ukraine. And yeah, so quick intro from my side before we move on to the speakers. Soon, just in a few months, it will be a year since Russia launched full-scale invasion, genocidal invasion of Ukraine, and 9 years since the beginning of the war. They started in March 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea. Since February, as we saw, Ukrainians bravely defending their country and fighting against imperialist Russia, we have heard many calls for peace, for diplomacy, and the slogans such as "No to War" became rather popular. But with those terms, many people put different ideas, and there's different meanings behind the word peace and the word diplomacy, the word negotiations. For peace, we also saw some from far right and far left groups that are sometimes linked to Kremlin, the demand to have peace and start negotiations. But in that case, it doesn't usually mean the peace as we would like it to be, but it usually means Ukraine to concede, to give up some territories and not to continue fighting. Or sometimes they just don't continue explaining what they mean by peace. So with this discussion, we want to shape a better green view on peace in Ukraine. What does it mean in these times when we talk about peace? This discussion also brought up about the NATO and this military alliance, for which the Greens have always been not really fond of, to say it like that. In the 80s, Greens were one of the biggest political projects that were against the military alliances and against the NATO. But as we see today, this has changed and the paradigms are changing. And but this is still remains one of few, but still a divisional lines within the Green movement. And it is especially visible in the regional differences. We have the Eastern European Green political parties or the political movements that are openly talking about the importance of NATO and the need of having it, while in the West we'll see that some positions have remained as they were some decades ago, even though the context has been largely changed after 24th of February. So I will now give floor to Katja and to Klāvs to introduce themselves and have their input, and after that we will continue with some of the important questions that we all have. So first I will ask some questions, and the floor will be open for you to for participants of this webinar to ask questions and also take part in discussion. So Katja, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, I'm Katja. I'm living in Ukraine now, and I met the war, like Russian war, actually twice in my life. When I lived in Crimea and it was occupied, and I was in my hometown that was like that was occupied which February, and yeah. So and firstly, I want to present how actually our expectation about world peace and about the reality that we live now, they broke in one moment, actually, but maybe not in one moment. It is also can be a discussable issue. So like every of us, I think for many of us, it will be the first we're not an expert on the topic of security and peace. We're not an expert on how countries can behave in hostilities, how we should help countries in war, and what we should do actually, because for all of us it is really new topic, and it's okay. It was okay because we lived in such world, democratic civilized world, that we even should not have to learn this. We should not learn how to behave than the bomb attack your city. We should not behave how to save in electricity because Russia is bombing or someone such country bombing your facilities and so on. But actually, reality is that it happened. It happened in 2022, so it happened in 21st century, and we should somehow to learn how to behave in these conditions, how to react and how to react properly, and to stop it, and not only stop like no shelling, but how to achieve a true peace, like this real peace. And firstly, I want to speak about my kind of personal experience. Because on February 24, I wake up, and I think many of you wake up. This news, like I wake up because of the shellings of my city, and my bed was shaken. But I think you wake up because of such a terrible news that Russia started a full-scale invasion. Russia started full-scale war at Ukraine, and for us it was surprise that in like this history period, is it possible that one country invades a territory of another country, peaceful, democratic development country, especially on European continent, then we're used to live in more than peaceful conditions than it is now. And even Ukrainians cannot accept, not all Ukrainians could accept at once that the war has happened, that the war, the full-scale war has happened, because before we had the war, but it was territorial limited, and it was not so big, but it was still influencing. But now, every citizen of Ukraine can feel it. Every citizen made this fear, these limitations, there's a lot of pain actually. and even before that, February 24, despite all warnings, despite all occasions that intelligence of another states said to us, and that media wrote that war was started, that Russia is gathering troops near the Ukrainian border, we still could not believe. And many, I personally couldn't believe that Russia actually will start a war. So we thought, okay, maybe it will be more intensive hostilities on the Donetsk and Lugansk region, but not a full-scale invasion, because even living for 8 years in such war condition, we could not imagine that it will happen, and it was really a surprise for us, like a cold water. And but actually, it was not the last surprise that it was for me this day. I will talk mostly about two things. The first thoughts that my first there about how the outside world will react to such cruelty of Russia, and we all know that the collective action, collective Western world, they condemned Russian invasion, but actually the practical actions took a long time. So, and here I want to remind that you have a war, but you have not just no kind of frozen conflict, but you have active war. There's active challenges and active hostilities. You cannot wait for days, even you cannot wait for weeks. Especially, you count every minute, because every minute people can die and infrastructure can damaged. But still, the first surprise was that despite all this open aggression, the collective war could not react. They could not react in actions. And it, of course, was very, very disappointed. And the second option, and in perspective, I now understand that I was very, very naive, but I still try to believe that Russian will protest against the war. And but actually, I was not so naive to believe that they will be like in truth against the war, but I hope that at least they will be against diet in the war, and they will protest, or maybe I don't know, mothers of soldiers that can be sent to the war will protest, but it did not happen actually, and it was my second surprise. So, and what they went wrong, this our word. That we could not meet our expectation. And actually, why it still was a surprise? Because Russia, like it was to remember that Russia did not become an aggression state on February 24, just this time. It did not become such state in February 2014 then. Russia annexed Crimea and started invasion on the Donetsk and Lugansk region after large-scale democratic revolution in Ukraine. And Russia did not become an aggression state after participation in the war in Syria, supporting the authoritarian government. And not after the invasion of Georgia or Transnistria, and not after two Chechen wars, then also thousand people died, and and these wars they were not in 1-2 years; they were for 40 years. Like it actually started after Russia gained independence, kind of independence. And even if we're not counting these wars, Russia was an aggressor state against its own population, but internal terror, and Russia just trying to demolish the identity, and even sometimes, but even now, demolish their physically this native folks in Russia, and by intensifying this Russian language, Russian culture, Russian narratives, and prohibited something local, something that can identify you as not Russian. And we can say, at least I can say, that Russia was an aggressor state from the very beginning and by its very nature. And Russia also is a ancestor of another huge terror empire as Soviet Union. And what I'm leading to that nobody should, in theory, be surprised that Russia started another war, and with just humanitarian reasons, and the world that think that shouldn't be ready for this, and the world should be prepared to react on this. But in the best scenario, the world should prevent such war. But it still does not happen, and why? The question is why. We are watching that such a huge, significant, economically and in an energy perspective country could, for a few decades, could continue its terror. And a bit of theory, very briefly, and if we will explore some literature, we can say that political science and history, they tell us that democracies very, very rarely starts the wars. And on the contrary, autocratic regimes are very aggressive towards especially the outside world, even not talking about its own population. This happens because it is not so profitable for democracies, to do this, and they gain their political points by other methods, like not war, and they try to improve the well-being of their citizens. When autocracies, on the other hand, they use wars for kind of like unite their citizens and to gain some bonuses and advantages to people who support the stability of this regime, and to like people who help to implement such terror practices. And for democracies, this price of war is very high, and they are not ready to do it, because they are not ready to pay this price. But even now, like despite that Russia started the war, like we see how harsh it is for Western economy to deal with this such a huge effect and of the war. But in the other hand, we see that Iran or China or Azerbaijan or Saudi Arabia, such not a very democratic country, they receive more profit of this war. And like when we're talking like, okay, like we are as a collective world, like civilized and democratic, like countries that try to be democracies and democratic and function in democratic way, they should, like as we thought, they create some word that can ensure that every country that will start such a like very aggressive and terror war will pay a very, very big price. But what we see now for Russia it was very easily to start the war, and Russia did not suffer so much. And even when it's openly declared that no one can even thought that it is not Russian soldiers, they did not have some flags or so on. Russia said openly that it started the war, but still it can function. Still it is alive, and like for me, it means that our like this peace common agreement on peace, it fucked up actually, and it did not work. And how it's happened and why it's it and what we should do with it, like it's our like a new issue we should tackle. We know that all we thought before about the world and about our international structures and about our international solidarities and about our declared values for peace, it does not work actually, and what we should do with it. And just my question to the space.
Yes, thank you, Katya, for this really in-depth summary of the horrific war crimes committed by the terrorist state of Russia. I am Klāvs, as you already said, I'm former member of Protest Board. I am from Latvia originally, however, now I live in the Netherlands and I study environmental policy. I, as everyone in the Eastern countries and Baltic countries, have really been invested in absolutely everything related to Russia's imperialism, because as every country in this region has experienced that. And I do feel it's super unfair that Ukrainians have to be heroic and fight for the European democratic and solidarity values, while the Western countries are not definitely doing enough to aid Ukraine in the war. Yes, as my security policy is also not my biggest academic knowledge section of my diploma. However, I've been quite involved, especially about food crisis. As you know, the war also had a terrible impact on developing nations because Russia blockaded all the ports in Ukraine, and therefore the terrorist actions of the Russian state definitely have way bigger impact on everyone in the world, unfortunately.
Cool. Thank you very much for your introductions. And maybe we can go with some of the questions that we have been thinking about. Well, first of all, I think to Katja, I would ask, what does, well, this is a very general question, of course, but I think we should start thinking about it. What does peace mean for Ukraine? And how is it possible to achieve it? How do you see this?
It is also very broad question. We can answer it in few sentences, but we can also write a book about this. And actually, what does it mean, the true peace, and what we're fighting for here now in Ukraine? It is not just to live in without shells, and to not just to have, I don't know, work in electricity, and to have a possibility to go to shops and go abroad. No, we're fighting for our democratic choice to live. We're fighting for democratic values to choose by ourselves how we want to live, and decide. We actually fight for our dignity, and yeah. And Russia, unfortunately, it does not mean something good, actually. And so from this we can also conclude what does this peace means for us. It's just to live in this true, real peace, when we, in one hand, we will have no any military action, when we can develop in different ways, not only in military and increase our military capacity, but we want to have a choice, to have a chance. Do not think about military something. We want to have concentrate on education, culture, increasing and developing our economy. We want to think about how make our cities more green, for example, and smart, but not about how to make our city prepare to the war and to prepare to the battles in the cities. So actually what we want to save our identity. We hope to save our democratic ways of development. We want to live in solidarity and peace, but not into to live in this.
I think we have some issues with connection, but we could hear most of it, except the end. Thanks, and maybe we can move on to Klāvs, and I would have start maybe with some questions already. One of the counter arguments, let's frame it like that, from some of the far right and far left groups, we hear when they talk about the war in Ukraine and talk about peace, is that Russia was forced to start war. Russia did not want war, but it was the US and the Europe and the NATO expansion that forced Russia to start military aggression against a neighboring independent country. And NATO is a big part of this discussion. They bring up this NATO-Russia agreement that in the 1991, back in the days when there still was Soviet Union, NATO representatives has agreed with Russia that there would be no more expansion of NATO to the east of Berlin. And yeah, in this context, also, we have seen that the Baltic states and Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania have been one of the most proactive supporters of Ukraine. We have seen also in the charts that compared to the GDP, in top 10, and the first and the second are Estonia and Latvia, who donated the most compared to their GDP to Ukraine, and supported with arms and weapons. So in this context, Klāvs, what do you think of the importance why Baltic states became part of the NATO in the first place, and what it meant for Latvia, and why there was a need for this decision, and why, as of today, the Greens on the local level in Latvia are very much supporting this and are pro NATO. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you for this question. NATO is definitely a huge part of this debate, and I do feel like most of the times it uses scapegoats, because we all know that Russia has always had imperialistic ambitions throughout the history, and I do not feel like the expansion to the east was in any way forcing it, because even like in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia, and there are so many examples where that could be noticed even before the expansion. For example, Chechnya and so on. Why Latvia joined NATO? It was one of the biggest goals of Latvia as soon as we regained our independence in 1991, to move towards European Union and NATO, for quite obvious reasons, because we wanted to belong to the Western democratic world instead of the Soviet totalitarian society that we were forced upon. I do feel like it was one of the best decisions we have made thus far, because if we were not in the situation we're currently, which is quite privileged that we're both member states of NATO and European Union ever since 2004, we might as well see that Russia would try something military against us, because we obviously are much smaller countries with less chances to fight back, and therefore. Also, that's quite one of the main examples why every single pro-Latvian party in Latvia, and even some softly pro-Russian parties, can never publicly speak against NATO, because NATO in this current form is the only safety guide we have against Russian imperialism, even though we can still see many signs of not hybrid, but many ways of trying to radicalize the Russian part of our society, as well as many attempts to just simply manipulate with information. And we can see that it's quite successful, because the Russian society in Latvia is still mostly confused on which side they are. Well, there's a significant part that's extremely pro-Ukraine. And I guess that's probably one of the main reasons why we are so pro-NATO, because otherwise we probably would not be having this conversation. And yeah, it is really complicated for us to, for example, in like European Green context, we can see that many parties who are further away from Russia, for example, do have stances more strongly against NATO as an alliance, which is to some degree understandable, because NATO as in its current form is definitely not appealing to the old school green pacifist mindset. However, we can see that parties who are closer to Russia, green parties especially, have changed their rhetoric. And for example, Greens, who used to be really pacifist in Germany, are now moving that their voting base is the most supportive of aiding Ukraine with heavy military. And I do feel like that's quite a big tendency we can see. And I hope this shift is even stronger as of now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So you think that, yeah, one of the things that's the counter argument that they bring up about supporting Ukraine, and we've seen, yeah, the Baltic states have been one of the biggest supporters in that regards, is that this this question that how can weapons support peace, and how supporting Ukraine with weapons and with ammunition and with military support generally will bring us closer to the peace. What do you think on this question? Maybe Katya, we start with you, and Klāvs also, you can have the floor on that. Why is it necessary to provide Ukraine with weapons, and how is it connected to the peace? As we sometimes hear that like traditionally bringing weapons fuels the war, but how is this different today with Ukraine?
It always very interesting to hear any reasons for people do not donate to Ukraine, donate money, but still, like, it is very needed, and it is needed just because we're not a very huge country with a big military facilities. We're not, I don't know, USA or Iran or even Russia, who has prepared. Like, Russia prepared for the wars not only like for 1 year, but for all its existence. But even before the 2014, when Russia started the war, we almost have not army, like almost had not function army, but still we were we still could do to stop advance of Russian troops. And that's why, we had only 8 years somehow to develop our military structure, to develop ourselves, and it is the main thing that I want to share, that Russia or Ukraine don't want weapons, and don't want to all this military system, HIMARS, all of this. We don't want weapons to attack Russia. We want weapons to defend ourselves. And it is the main difference between Russia and Ukraine, that the Russia trying to attack and invade and terror people, then Ukraine just trying to recapture our territory, just to make people on these territories free, to stop this war and do not continue this war, and to live in our democratic conditions. And that's why it's very important to help such countries who are fighting for this kind of European values and these democratic values and democratic parts of the development, because it is what we want as a world. And here is, even if you're a pacifist, but still, like, even Greens, they support this right to self-defense. And here we have this case, and Ukraine is self-defense. We are not attacked. We are and it is okay to help a victim. It is okay to provide a victim with the tools to fight and to defend themselves. And for example, we can transfer the situation to our regular life. For example, if someone trying to rape another person, we for example, we will provide as one of the recommendation among other tools, it will be, okay, this person who can be a victim can attend, for example, self-defense classes. And it's kind of how we can help to defend and to protest such aggression. And unfortunately, we cannot, we understand that we need weapons to defend, but why we need weapons, but not, for example, negotiation or something like this. Like, it's usually, especially Russia, very like to manipulate these negotiations. Even now they're saying, okay, we're very open to negotiate, but Ukrainian authorities don't want to do it, and so on. But actually, Russia are not ready to real negotiations. Russia is, okay, are you accepting our terms or not? Like, it's not a negotiation, it's an ultimatum. And but we are not like Ukraine are not against negotiation, but it will be real negotiations, and we also have our own points we will stand for. For example, at the beginning of this full-scale invasion, fighting from Ukraine side, it will be that will leave until the date of like early morning and February 24. Like even we didn't talk about this annexed Crimea and part of Donetsk and Lugansk. Ukraine are open, but do not like they are not open to give up, just give up as Russia proposed. And we, unfortunately, as we see now, the war cannot be solved and ended by negotiations or any other methods. The only method that Russia, unfortunately, it's the only method that Russia can understand now is it's a military attack, and we can see this gest of I don't know how to say it in English. They through like goodwill from Russian side, they for example leave the Snake Island, or they leave the Kharkiv region territory, and then Ukraine demonstrate this military force. And that's a method that Russia understands. And then more we will have, then faster we can end this war. And Ukraine are not going to go to Moscow as a Soviet Red Army goes to Berlin. But we don't want to go to Moscow. We don't want to go to Belgorod or Rostov-na-Don. We just want to have our own territory, to control us, to have our sovereignty. And yeah, it's my main point.
Thank you. And yeah, Klāvs, maybe you can also have an input on
Yes, from the Baltic perspective, it's also clear that unless we generally do stop Russia and give Ukraine back all of their lands that they deserve, especially Crimea, which they have illegally annexed as of now, then what signal does it send to Russia if we would be like, yeah, sure, Ukraine should just surrender also these regions? It would just mean that Russia can continue like that and just experience some sanctions that do not strictly fully stop their economy. And that would definitely not work in the long term, because then will NATO protect, for example, Baltic states in case if Russia decides to invade them? And that is also the reason why Latvia and Estonia have given almost 40% of our military spending towards Ukraine, which would technically reduce our chances to defend ourselves in case that will be necessary, and hopefully not. But at the same time, we understand that if Ukraine does not win in this war, then what are the chances that we are not the next ones? And that is why we will always be such strong supporters of Ukraine in every single way we can throughout the spectrum. And also, like today's coalition agreement that was reached, unfortunately without the progressives, says that Latvia will increase our military spending to 3% of our GDP until 2026. So I guess we will be more militarized as of now just because of Russian imperialism, even though we desperately need investments in other spheres of our life.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And another important
part some
yes.
Yeah, and still I want to remind that the 24th February, but war started 10 years ago, and to try to use any other tools, so such economic pressure, political pressure, like the West especially, that give us weapons now, have a time, plenty time to use this method, but unfortunately it did not work. Maybe it was not so effective, maybe it was not enough sanctions, but like that's why now we need to use weapons as a main tool, but not economic and political pressure. So like it's a last instance that for us we already used previous methods.
And this very well brings us to the next aspect of pressure on Russia and supporting Ukraine and the way forward for peace. And this is political and economic sanctions on Russia. We have seen already starting from the February that we have seen rather massive sanctions towards the Russia from the Western countries and the Western democracies. However, we have also seen that they are working, but they are not working as well as we would like it to be. So let's maybe start with Katya this time. What is your opinions on the current sanctions, and what are the possible ways we can the countries around the world, especially the Western countries, can increase the pressure on Russia's imperialist war?
Like for me, it will be the same questions till the war will end. Like if Russia is still alive and if Russia is still able to continue the war and continue to cause such a huge damage, and sanction will not work. Like it's not enough. Like it's not enough sanction in Russia, and that I was frustrated from when the full-scale invasion started, that it even had the time to countries, like we need to talk with these countries to make them to, for example, close an airspace for Russian aircraft. And we see like that Russia started the war 8 years ago, but the truly hard sanctions were implemented only now. And even like for now, for 8 months of the war, like full-scale war, for example, one of the huge Russian banks can still freely operate, and the West still buying Russian gas and energy. So the West so much developed its dependence on Russian fossil fuels that now, like even like they finance this war. Actually, they help Ukraine with weapons, for example, on this financial or humanitarian aid. But at the same time, they help Russia to have money to continue this this war, and it will be not enough. And it's very frustrating too that Europe and the US and actually all these collective civilized democratic developed countries, they are very cautious of these sanctions. So okay, like let's do not escalate the war. Like I don't know what can actually happen to less. And we even have a joint joke, like in Ukraine, so what will happen? Putin will invade, but Putin already invaded Ukraine. And yeah, it's the main questions why we still tolerate Russia, why we still have economical relations with Russia, why we still have political relations, and these relations not about negotiations, it's not about how to stop the war, it's just like we can still invite to the conference, we still can have Russia in the United Nations Security Council. This also stopped the work on such huge institution, and we see that it doesn't work. And how we can trust and how we should reform such structures, how we should change approach to our national policy and our international policies to prevent such cases.
Yes, and I'll return back with the Baltic perspective. I do feel like one major topic we need to discuss is how well the Russian non-state actors have, or state actors even, have managed to make the Western countries, as also like Eastern European countries, reliant on Russian fossil fuels. because we could see in Latvia that the Russian-owned gas company that has contract with almost every single household in Latvia is still a major contributor towards the fees, and we are still giving money to Russia as of now, which is not, to put it lightly, preferable. And even though before we proudly announced we are not buying Russian gas anymore, we can see that we are apparently still buying Russian gas, funnily enough, under nationalist-led Ministry of Economics, who thankfully should be the biggest opponents to Russia as of now. And only on the 1st of January this next year, we'll finally stop buying Russian gas. And from the green perspective, again, we can talk about how the Gazprom lobby most likely was successful at stopping member states to properly invest in renewables and sustainable energy sources, because we can see that in the countries that are more with more diverse sources of energy, for example, France with their nuclear, which is not a good topic for the Greens, or like Scotland with their huge wind energy potential, we can see that like Russian gas, like banning Russian gas has been a better solution for them. And yeah, I don't know, the sanctions as of now are clearly not enough. And it is quite sad that like some countries like Hungary can ban proper sanctions that would generally have an impact just because Orban is in a good relationships with Putin, and we don't know how, for example, the new Italian government will react to proposition of sanctions. And this is yet another proof as European Union that we should have another forum where all the member states do not have veto power over such major decisions. And I don't know, like this war has just showed how so many vulnerabilities in the Western security policy, not strictly military, but in so many other spheres of our life.
And here is also a question of collective responsibility of Russian citizens for the war of Russia. And it caused a huge debate, this proposition of Baltic states to ban a tourist visa for Russia. And we saw such a huge resistance in other countries, and but actually like especially Baltic countries, they wanted to do it not only just to punish Russians and that's all, but also for their own security reasons, because Russian agents, Russian like influences spreads a lot, and also these people. And here is also the debatable questions: should we punish Russian citizens, or only Russian government or Russian economy, and so on? And my answer for this is now that, like, yes, we should we should punish Russians as much as possible, and not just because of their nationality or something like this, just because they're representative of the countries or which started the war, and these countries started different wars for like a few decades, and they did not did nothing to stop it. Even the most popular opposition activists in Russia, they are not against annexation of Crimea, for example. They were in favor of Chechen wars, that there are thousands of people died. They are silent about this internal terror of Russia against its own citizens. And for example, Russian FSB just blew up the whole like residential buildings just to have imaginary reasons to start the Chechen wars, for example. It's just a very terrible. I even did not imagine that someone can do something like this, but by I don't know why, but Russian is okay with it, and now they're okay. These wars, at least it touch themselves, and that's why sanctions should be influence a lot of regular Russian citizens. Just only then, I believe, they can start to act, and maybe act not only against the war as a like concept, and by at least to stop the war, to stop the sanctions, to stop the war, to do not send their daughters and sisters to the war as soldiers to die, and to have such a benefits of peaceful country as they had even there isn't war.
Cool. Thank you very much for your input. We can continue discussion and open the floor for our participants to also ask their questions. And yeah, the floor is open. I read there is already one question. So yeah, feel free to jump in and ask the question. We will have around 20 more minutes for questions and answers and continuing the discussion with the involvement of participants.
Okay, obviously. Hi, I'm Louisa, originally from the Swedish Young Greens, but currently live in the Netherlands. And I would love to hear two of you talk a bit more about like the future of Russia, and especially what would happen to Russia in the case of Ukrainian victory. Because I feel like I can imagine quite clearly what would happen if Russia were to win a war. But I would love to hear like how will the sanctions and eventual Ukrainian victory and also like eventual like anti-Kremlin sentiment in Russia affect like the Russian dictatorship? Like, will it somehow help dismantle it? Will it make the dictatorship even worse? Could this like be the beginning of the end of Putin somehow? Or do you just think that it will be business as usual in Russia?
Thank you for a very interesting question. Yeah, Kaita, Klāvs, feel free to share your perspective.
All right, like I do feel like it's quite a big speculation to make, and I do feel like, okay, that means that Putin will likely lose power because, as we know from political theory, once a dictator cannot give enough money to their closest circle, there probably will be some kind of rebellion against him or them, and then probably the dictator would be exchanged with someone else. But generally, it's really hard for me to see how it could change in any sort of way because, like, as we can see, the Ukraine is now doing quite a good counterattack, and Russia is losing ground. And it seems like Russia has gotten a lot more desperate than they were before, even though it was clear that the war is in stalemate, and now it's like against their positions. And even though winter is not really the best time for warfare in any single situation, but I don't know. It's really hard to like even estimate how Russian society would act to that because there is definitely a huge propaganda in Russia, and I don't think no one has ever denied that. But it is really hard to see how could they spin it even as the slightest victory in some sort of way. And I don't know. It's truly speculation as of now, but I do hope it leads to something more democratic, even though I don't think there has ever been a single period where Russia has been a democratic country per se.
I usually like to dream what will happen about with Russia when Ukrainian will win. And like the best scenario for me, and I know it will not happen just the next day when Ukraine will win and Russia will just give up, and it can take like I don't know 15 years or maybe 100 years, but I hope that it will happen that Russia will not exist as this entire country, and that like we know that Russia is imprisoned so much native folks. Russia is like very aggressive states, and even now we see that how unfair this division on these people who are sent into to the war, especially to the like hard front lines, that it mostly people not from Moscow or from St. Petersburg, and people from this republics, these ethnic minorities. And I hope it can be a trigger to such to this republic and to these minorities to start such a kind of protest, and to start a way to separate from Russia and to have their own government and to have their right, do not send it their people to the war to die for nothing. And yeah, I hope we will not have even the concept of Russia in future, because Russia is an imperial state, and Russia is not like, it's historical imperial state. That's why I still remember this name. But people have their right to self-determination. They have the right to choose, do we want, even to choose, or do they want to start a war or not, because, and do they want to die or not, because they know. Even now we see then Putin announced mobilization, that many protest initiatives are started in this republic with ethnic minorities, and I hope I'm very optimistic about it, that it can be like a first step, a first signal to Russia to just to be divided into many republics, independent and sovereign republic.
Thanks. And there's another question in chat. I will read it out for you. After Russia started to expand its conscription policies and deployed their reserves, we have seen many videos about Russian conscripts in the fields complaining about lack of food and supplies. This has been seen as an act of anti-war actions for many Western people, and some of them even sympathize with these conscripts. However, the soldiers didn't mention anything about being against the war at all. And I think Russians started to use these videos for their own benefits, even though it may seem it's used against them. So what do you think about this situation, and what can be done in the West to counter this? Yeah, the question is about the lack of food and the supplies to the Russian conscripts, and yeah, how this was translated as possibly as an anti-war stances by the conscripts when they were complaining about the lack of equipment they had. Maybe very shortly we can answer this question. Klāvs, Katja?
Yeah, first of all, the no war motion for me is quite hilarious, because even like at the beginning of the expanded invasion of Ukraine, we could see that a lot of Russians at least pretended to be against the war with like no war messages, but at the same time, like I do not feel like any of them quite acknowledge the fact that Russia in its current form is literally committing a genocide against Ukrainian people. And if Russian people do not even accept that, like they're currently occupying a huge portion of Ukraine, which is by international law definitely Ukrainian territory still, like how can we even pretend to some degree that Russia is doing something, Russians themselves, if they're not even acknowledging the biggest elephants in the room we have right now? And also the second question about like the conscripts rebellion. I mean, it's quite impressive to see how Russian army, which is basically Soviet army, slightly modernized, has always been extremely corrupt, at least from the stories I can hear from my family. But it's impressive how in these 30 years, Russian military has gotten so terrible that the logistic chains have been so screwed. Because on paper, of course, the war should not even be that close, because Russia has so much more supplies, etc. And even the Western support, that's quite significant nowadays, but still not enough. Should not be enough. But however, Russian army is just screwing up so big time. And also the new conscripts, as of now, as at least from what I have read, they have not been prepared properly, and they have been just sent into the war zone basically with not enough training. And like, I do feel like it's their own responsibility, because they kind of obviously knew where they're going. So I don't know. I do not really feel any solidarity towards the conscripts and from Russian army.
Yeah, it's it sounds like they complain about, oh, we don't have enough tools to kill more Ukrainians. Like, oh, you should emphasize us, we are so poor, and so on. And like, if I don't know, Western media something they like sympathize to such people, so they sympathize again to that we are not could not efficiently kill Ukrainians. And even like in Ukrainian talk that actually corruption in Russia is our main friend, like allies in this war, and actually that Russian soldiers are not well prepared. It's also like it's very good for us actually, and we're not going to help them if they don't want to die, so they can not go to the war. Like I don't, if I had a moral I have to make a moral decision, go to the war or to spend 10 years in prisons, I think I will choose spend time in prison to not kill anyone. And but in any case, if they even already soldiers, they on the front, like they have a chance to go to Ukrainian army and to be like captured like voluntary, and we all know that even comparable these videos and photos and stories of people that were captured by Ukrainian army and by Russian army that are treated by Ukrainian, it's much better, and like there is no like if you're like if you're behaving normally, I can say, so there's no a risk to being killed in capture, and for Russians in Ukrainian capture as for Ukrainians in Russian captures. We all should remember this terrible case of Olenivka prisons that Russia bombed the prison, its defenders of Azovstal, and killing like 40 people, and it is I cannot imagine how someone still can do like this, but we had it, this situation. So even if Russian soldiers worried a lot about their safety, they can go to Ukrainian army and stop fighting, and even maybe help with some data. I think we lost Geo. Oh, Geo again.
Yeah, sorry, I lost connection. Do you have any more questions, maybe from you, from participants? A few more questions, and we are good with time. Yes, there is one more. Yeah, we have. Yeah, thank you for the answers from the chat.
About security part and the global security, sorry for speaking a lot, I want to what I'm worried about, kind of, that we see that the war in Ukraine influenced countries abroad so much that they started to, as Klāvs already mentioned, to increase their military budget. And it is so true not only to countries there's borders with Russia, but also for like other countries too. And it is such a tendency we see now, and we also should think what we should do with it in future. If we will not have a war, what will happen with these weapons, and what we will do, and what is the risk and what is the benefits of this?
Definitely a very important question, and that on the one hand, we know that it is important to invest and to have a security guarantees, and we have seen some disturbing statements from Germany, for example, where we heard that Germany doesn't have enough ammunition and its army is not ready to fight at all. and so much that it cannot send some of the weapons to Ukraine because it will be left without anything. But at the same time, the increased militarism and is a challenge and is a threat as well, both to peace, but also to democracy, because we've seen in many cases where we have this high militarization, it usually represses the progressive forces and the left-leaning forces, and that definitely is a danger for now and also for the future. I see that we don't have any more questions from the participants. Maybe Klāvs and Katja, if you want to make some closing remarks for around 2 minutes, and then we will finish with our webinar.
Yeah, from my side, I want to touch on the topic about European common defense policy, which has been quite a big topic ever since Trump took office. I was actually interested to look at data about it, and it seems like in Latvia and Lithuania, more than 70 to 80% support this, and Benelux countries were also a significant part where they support more unity in European level. But at the same time, we can see that if we would not be this reliant on the US, would Germany, for example, its current state, being a good ally in case something happens? And like, I do feel like we should be having also these conversations about NATO becoming more democratic, because as of now it's strongly a US dominated alliance, but at the same time, it is quite dangerous as of now to think that US could, for example, pull out completely out of Europe while we still have a dictatorship. Latvia even has 2 dictatorships bordering us, so I do feel like we should be quite ready for any potential developments, because as it seems to be suggested that Trump is running again on the way more pro-Putin platform, and yeah, there are so many major things that can disrupt the current system of political system and international policy.
And from my side, like, I think then the Russia full-scale invade in Ukraine, they're all like our thoughts about the like peace and democracy and safety and security very change, and need to put like we have to ask many questions, new questions for us and for our government.
I think we have an issue with connection from Katja.
Haven't you hear me?
Now we hear you.
Okay, so like we should think about how we should build this true security and true peace, how we can ensure it, how we can prevent the happening something like this in future, and how we prevent the escalation, and how we can stop this war that influence like the whole world, like a few Ukrainian grain supplies, for example. Even African countries can like be affected by this war. And yeah, what we should do with it actually is an open question, and for all of us, and especially for Greens that are supposed to be progressive and to think in future. So we should work on it more. Where again was Gil?
I guess he disappeared.
Yeah. So I can try to continue some moderation. Yeah. So if you have any other question, I also see that we already lost our participants, some of them. So if you don't have any question, we can end it our webinar. In any case, you can ask a question in CDN and FAG chats. I think you can write us privately. I think it's at least for me. And we're open for discussion. We're open for talking about this topic more. And thank you all for being here and for listening.
Yes, and I want to say thank you for CDN for inviting me. This was really nice first CDN event to attend, and I'm really happy I was invited. Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending, all of you, and sorry for sometimes my internet not working really well, but well, internet in some parts of Eastern Europe is not that great. Thank you and goodbye.
It's funny that in Ukraine, but we half of the country do not have electricity. We have a better internet than you in Serbia.
True
All
that.
our realities, very strange reality. So have a nice day. Evening. Bye.